Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Lou Massett, our Chief Operations and Missions Officer.
That's right.
Well, welcome to our podcast studio today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Colleen. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about Uganda's new anti-homosexuality bill, which got passed this past May. And there's been a lot of backlash in Western media about this bill. You see it on all sorts of news sources saying that this bill they're calling it like the kill the gays bill because one of the punishments is death penalty for cases of aggravated homosexuality. And we'll get into that. But yeah, let's just start by just having a conversation about this and talking about it so that our listeners understand the broader cultural context that this bill is being found in, because this is one of the countries that we have an affiliate in. So we've been able to sit down and talk with him and try to understand why this bill was being passed in the first place and what was going on. So can you just start by telling our listeners some of the background of the cultural situation that's been going on in Uganda?
Sure. Well, can I give you a little bit of context? So I've only been here, as you know, for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And as the Chief Operations Mission Officer, I oversee the mission field. So it was really neat for me coming in here from my background in education to see, what HLI did. I went to school here, right down the road at Christendom. And
did you know anything about what HLI did before you started here?
I didn't know, actually.
Neither
so
did I.
I knew it was like a pro-life organization, and it was like, oh, that's great. But it's what's kind of interesting about this conversation is how I came here had to do with kind of this issue that we're talking about with this kind of gender ideology, at the school I was at before. So that kind of led me, and I won't go down that rabbit hole, but what was fascinating for me is taking this role is realizing the profound work that HLI is doing in the mission field, primarily educational, right? Trying to promote the gospel of life. And, as you pointed out, that what we're seeing in Uganda and Africa in general is this outpouring of resources by Western governments and even nonprofits, NGOs that are trying to change African society and African culture by embracing the gender ideology, which we're seeing, everywhere here in the United States.
How are they doing that in general, not just with the gender and the homosexuality thing, but in general, how are they changing the culture? Can you talk a little bit specifically about what's going on there?
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing.
Okay.
What we do is, we educate. So in Africa, what's very interesting is that when we have like these programs, so we have a director in each region throughout the world, and we have two actually directors in Africa, one in Francophile where they speak French, and Anglophile where they speak English. And
we had George on the podcast back in June, I believe, or July when it was released. So he talked a little bit about this because he's in Francophone, French-speaking Africa.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And George is great. But what's interesting is that I found that whenever they have these programs where there's these educational workshops, whatnot, where they teach people the gospel of life, teach them about, specific things about how to practice their Catholic life in marriage or whatnot, that they actually have to pay the people to come to these events. And this is a common thing in Africa where
really,
so to go, they actually pay the people to come. That's just part of the culture.
Why do they have to do that?
It's just the expectation, right? That you're going to come, that they'll provide you with a meal and they pay you. It's just that's just how it works.
Like pay you like a stipend, or they provide like food and things like that? Because both. Okay.
Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah. So
I've worked here a year and I didn't realize that.
It's interesting, these cultural phenomenon, these things that happen. So, Africa is relatively an incredibly poor, continent, right? There's not a lot of money. So, you have these opportunities with these wealthy nations to come in and to promise to increase the quality, improve the quality of life.
These different charities,
NGOs. We have, I'll give you some of the names. Like there's the Eastern and Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project, or you have SMUG, which is
sexual
minority of Uganda, right?
Yeah.
So USAID or other organizations.
Is that under the UN?
No, that's the United States aid,
okay.
Right? So they create these programs where they provide resources or just money for these specific programs to promote specific things, whether it's contraception, whatever. In this particular case, it is the gender ideology,
Mm-hmm.
which is promoting the rights of homosexual people and teaching people about the lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And basically challenging the mores and the folkways of Uganda or other countries in Africa.
Their
right?
cultural.
Yeah, their cultural beliefs, their moral
Yeah.
values, whether they're Muslim or whether they're Catholic or other Christian denominations. They're
Mm-hmm.
saying this is actually morally okay.
Do you know what religion like Uganda and these countries generally are? Is it mostly Muslim? Is it mostly Christian? Do you know? Is it a mix of all of
It's
them?
a mix.
Okay.
I think Uganda is 60% Christian.
Okay.
The specific breakdown, I'm not sure
Yeah,
at
I'm
this
not sure
moment.
either. I wasn't sure if you knew it off the top of your
Yeah,
head.
no, I don't actually. I'm sorry.
No.
But what is clear, though, is in Africa that,
Mm-hmm.
these views about human sexuality are very clear.
Yes.
And they're very, very strong.
It seems like it's a very family-centered, marriage-centered culture.
Right. Well, it's interesting. So my father went to Tanzania back in the 2000s. He was working with a priest and a group that were trying to help this one particular tribe in Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
And the trip and a lot of the stuff that was, he was going there because he had a background in pipe fitting and steam fitting and water and whatnot. And they wanted to build an irrigation system for this village so they could have crops and then they would have, revenue for the village. It was a Catholic village, but the man that was funding a lot of the stuff was a Muslim prince. And this man had 100 wives and I don't know how many children. Right. But you find, in a number of African countries, this attitude of, of being open to life and the blessings of having large families.
Even though they're poor, which is so contrary to what we see here in America.
Right. It was interesting because my father said what amazed him when he went to this little poor village out in the middle of nowhere is just how joyful these people were. They were full of joy, but they were dirt poor, right? But they weren't like kids say like, "Oh, my Ferrari broke down." It's like, "Oh, I feel so bad for you, man." They had nothing, right? Like they treated them like he said that we ate like kings, and it's like they had chicken and rice every night. It's like that was like they rolled out the red carpet. So you have this nation that this continent that has people with a lot of need. Right. And you have people that are expressing goodwill in some sense, or at least perceived goodwill, right? That we are going to help these people. Right. So,
but their way of helping them
right
is to promote contraception and try to reduce fertility.
Right. So you have, obviously the Christian Catholic view, which is that, God is creative. God is procreative. Right. God is, about the procreation of life. Right. That is what we see in nature. Nature strives to live, right? And in the West, it's materialism, right? And we see that here in the United States, how that has kind of shifted and shaped the way we see life. It's not about, as John Paul II said, it's not about being, it's about having.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So we see them as like, well, they don't have anything, right? And how miserable it is. And I'm not saying that there isn't suffering in Africa. There certainly is, right? But instead of going in there and trying to promote things that are helping them with, in the agrarian, aspects of their culture,
irrigation and
like what my father did, or other places of trying to help them, right? Educate them about how to be able to take care of themselves and things,
or use their natural resources in a way that will be able to help benefit their economy.
Right. Exactly. So what they're trying to do is reduce the population. Right?
Why?
I think it's just it's a secular mindset, right? Is that they have, it's a lot easier to feed one kid than it is to feed six, right?
Yeah, so I understand that why they're doing that, but like, why would Western organizations be motivated to try to reduce the population of Africa?
You have, there's a number of reasons. Right now we see here in the West where, there's this idea of global warming, right? That the world is over. There's this notion that the world is overpopulated, right? So how do you resolve that? We got to reduce the population. You got to reduce the number of cows. There's so many people eating hamburgers at McDonald's, and so there's this mindset that what we have to do, this is again the secular mindset, is that
Mhm.
we have to start to cull the herd. And that's a very kind of a
Yeah,
harsh way of
term.
saying it, but
Yeah.
that's the reality of it, right?
Mhm.
It's saying how do we curb, the population?
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily know it's intentional, but it's maybe just an outworking of
Mhm.
it's just an outworking of wanting to have things.
And I feel like that's so accepted in the secular mindset in Western nations that you want to reduce population in like the secular general ideology. So it makes sense that then they're just going to try to project that onto other countries as well.
Right, of course, because it's interesting, and I'm sure that we've covered this in other podcasts here, but we got this kind of demographic issue now, right?
Yeah, the demographic winter.
Right. So we were talking to Dr. Lagaya, who is our director in Asia, and she was going to Japan. And in Japan now, the government is trying to stimulate or motivate people to have children through giving resources. I think it's a $3 billion bill or something they just passed to encourage people to have children because they have, I think, a fertility rate of 1.1. Which is kind of this inverted pyramid.
And we've talked about that on here before, that the problems that come up with that.
Right. So Africa doesn't have that problem.
Yet.
Right. Exactly. So anyways, to get back to this point about what's happening here in Uganda is that there has been this promotion through these NGOs that I've mentioned to promote a gender ideology, which is teaching, young kids specifically about homosexuality and transgenderism and whatnot.
And I think it started in 2014 because that's when the court in Uganda struck down the law prohibiting homosexuality. And then after that, you had all of these NGOs sending groups into schools and into the community. And I think our affiliate in Uganda, when I got the chance with Father to sit down and talk to him about this, he was saying that the ages they're targeting are between 3 and 14.
That's correct.
So it's very young. And it's similar to what we see here in schools today. It's just very, very similar to what we have going on in the public schools in our own towns.
Right. It's kind of like Ray Kroc when he became the head honcho at McDonald's. It's like, you want to promote McDonald's, you have to get the kids. Don't market towards the parents, market towards the kids, right? So
Mom, I want a Happy Meal.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you see this, and so this current bill that we're talking about, what happened is these young people started to be drawn into this way of thinking, and there were some really perverse, things that were going on where they were making, homosexual pornography, and kids were getting involved. And one story that they talked about at Parliament was this young man that contracted an STD through this, this whatever you want to call it, program.
Yeah.
And there was a number of young people that were sodomized, and they were in the hospital because of the damage it had done to their bodies. And there was this incredible outcry, or there's this reaction to it.
Among the parents.
Among the parents.
They were horrified.
Right. And it was just so contrary to their culture, right? Their culture is one way, right? And you have this new idea and these practices, and they could see it. So we had this visceral reaction.
Yeah. And I think that our affiliate over in Uganda was saying that during COVID was when it really got ramped up. So between like 2021, 22, there was this huge increase among the teens of quote unquote recruiting them for these groups, which actually what you were saying about their culture, paying people to come to events, makes a lot more sense because we have one video, which we can show in a moment, of this boy talking about how he was paid 133, well, it was I think 500 shillings, 500,000 shillings, equivalent of $133 in American money, to attend one of these events where he was then shown gay porn. And here, let me pull up the video.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good to see that.
Yeah, we can watch that.
Yeah, but so these are the things that it's they're being enticed to come because there's a financial benefit to coming to these things, and they have a lot more resources.
Yeah.
Than HLI does, right? What we're trying to do.
Do you know where their money's coming from? Is it tax dollars that are going towards?
Oh yeah, when USAID is United States aid, right? That's our money going into these specific whatever NGOs. There's very good things they do, and there's things like this, which is, it has nothing to do with really the hierarchy of need, right, which is food, shelter, clothing, right? You're not talking about that. You're talking about, let's change the way you think about who you are as a person, or your religious values, or your cultural values.
It's
right?
I think, is it Pope Francis that calls it ideological colonization? I think
Yes.
that's the phrase that's thrown around for this.
Correct.
It's a new form of colonization, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here, this is a video that we had that our affiliate sent us.
Hello, my name is Mukisa Elisha. I'm a Ugandan of sound mind. I happen to be recruited into homosexuality by Sexual Minorities Uganda, in short, SMAG, at the age of 16 while I was in my high school. They actually come with a coupon. One of their agents, some of the agents that are sent out to schools, to NGO homes such as SOS, Watoto, and then the churches. They come and with a coupon invite you to one of their activities. Of course, they have well equipped and well facilitated auditorium rooms and then shelters where they do their gay activities from. So I was invited by one of their agents and asked to attend one of their activities. And then on the coupon, there was an indication that there was actually a transport refund of 500,000. So of course, for any other youth, for any normal youth, once somebody invites you for their activity, and then they're proposing to refund your transport of 500,000. So you can now imagine how very many could be lowered into acts of homosexuality. So I attended one of their activities. I agreed to go and attend because one of the reasons was because I was ideally interested in the transport refund of 500,000. So I attended one of the activities. And basically what they do is in the activities is to of course give you fake lies about human rights, and then in the process they start showing you, like I said, they have well equipped and facilitated auditorium rooms and shelters where they actually have projectors and then show children gay porn, how gay porn is made, and then they convince them with that doctrine that each video that you shoot, you're given 5 million shillings. So I was taken through the procedure in as many activities as I went through. I was sexually exploited and recruited into making gay porn videos.
And then it continues a little. There's more to the video, but he ends up talking about how he got an STD. And then when he went to go get medical help, they wouldn't give him any medical help. So he ended up exploiting or calling out the organization, the Sexual Minorities Uganda, that exploited him. And I think they might have gotten shut down because of it. But yeah, that was one video that our affiliate sent us just to give us an idea of what's actually going on.
Well, there, with this law that's passed, there are the good is that 38 of the NGOs that were promoting this, this worldview, which is contrary to, natural law, divine law, church law, it was shut down. And this HLI was integral in working with people in Uganda. Our affiliate there, Father Opio, Jonathan Opio, was our boots on the ground there, and working with parliamentarians to teach them about specifically what was happening.
So not to necessarily say you should put this in a law or that in a law, but just kind of say this is what's actually going on culturally,
right?
So that then the lawmakers could make what they deem the best decision for their country.
Because the thing is, this is very important. Is that, going back to your initial point, is that this is this law is being utilized to dehumanize homosexuals, right? Which is contrary to what the truth of the Gospels, right?
Yeah.
Because what we've tried to encourage the parliamentarians is have a balanced approach towards this, which is, you have everywhere in the world there's a human being, there's a sinner, right? And that we're all sinners, and that we're called to a life of repentance. And that's what we have encouraged and taught in our programs. What you see here, though, with, the, I think you mentioned it, the, what was the word you used? It was aggravated homosexuality.
Well, that's what it's called in the law.
Right.
So it's cases of rape, pedophilia, but it's unknowingly spreading HIV, but it also includes multiple offenses basically under the law, with quotes around that, basically people who get caught multiple times in these acts. The one thing the law does make very, very clear is that it's the actions that are being criminalized, not people. It says that if someone is suspected of being homosexual, but there's no actual act that's been performed, there's no proof there, that's not what this law is addressing.
And that's a very important distinction to make, because I think that one of the things that we have today, is this notion that people were being persecuted in the past because of perhaps they were effeminate. I've seen this in some of the dialogues that have been about, gay marriage or things like that, back in the day, they used to persecute people just for having that type of thing. Now, that may be true in some cases, right? But it still doesn't change the fact, to your point, Colleen, that we're not talking about people that have same-sex attraction. Right? We're not saying that having that makes you an evil person or an immoral person. It's about the action, right? In this particular case, what we're seeing in Africa is that this reaction, these parents that saw these children, the consequences of them being sodomized, right? And this visceral reaction in the culture to that, right? And so you have this
they were horrified about what was being taught to their kids in school, and how kids were being paid money to go join these clubs where they're going to be shown gay porn and then recruited into making gay porn and getting lifelong diseases because of it.
Correct.
From my understanding of what I've heard from
this is what
we're being told.
We're being told from our folks there. So it was, I think that we have a video there I shared with you about.
Yeah, do you want me? I can pull it up.
I think that would be important to see. This is the parliamentarian there that was saying this. This was the Honorable Musa Ekweru, gave this talk.
Here it is.
Master Speaker, I can tell you for sure, I have gone to some hospitals and I have seen children with ripped anuses. Children with ripped anuses. I have talked to the doctors and asked the doctors what happened. These children were molested by homosexuals. And for anybody who is reasonable to stand here and say that this thing is okay, it's a human right to destroy people's anuses, that person is evil, hell belongs to that person. That person is evil, hell belongs to that person, and I can tell you, we will win this race. We will win the race. Those who believe in it in their countries, have it there. In our country, we will have our morals. We will protect our children. And we are making this law. We are making this law for ourselves. We are making this law for our children. We are making this law for the children of our children. This country will stand firm. And once it passed, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, we are going to reinforce the law enforcement officers to make sure that homosexuals have no space in Uganda. You will have no space in Uganda.
Did you get that from our affiliate? Did he send that to
you? Yes.
Okay.
Father Opio had sent that to us. Now, it's a pretty provocative, statement. And I think that for most people in the West, it's shocking to hear that kind of language. And
you made the good point that he's kind of putting together homosexuals with pedophiles in that video.
Right.
And so obviously that's not
there's conflation.
There's conflation.
Yeah, that's conflation of people, and this, it's
which isn't fair.
Which
that's
isn't
not
fair. No.
fair in any way.
And it's demonizing in a certain sense everybody. Because I think that even our Lord said anybody who scandalizes one of these children, put a millstone around their neck. So there's a sense of people that are sexually abusing children. That is something that is just so intolerable and disgusting to almost all people. That you have that type of reaction.
Yeah.
Right? The problem from a Catholic standpoint is this is not what the Catholic Church teaches, right? That people with same-sex attraction are supposed to be treated with dignity and respect.
They're human persons.
They're human beings. And this is something that we have encouraged. And when this was going on with the law here in Uganda, we were adamant that this was not an outworking Scripture.
And we told them not to. We were opposed to the death penalty.
Oh, absolutely.
What Father Opio was saying is that we told parliamentarians not to include that.
Right.
And the reason it got included was because of the case that you were mentioning earlier, that of the young boy who they had gotten injured and was in the ICU because of it. That was why the parliamentarians included that in the bill.
Right.
Was because they were outraged over this situation. But
Right.
our affiliate and the people working with him had gone in and said, don't include the death penalty.
Right. Right. So there's this element of human dignity, right? And it's what's interesting, we being from the West, we see, people in all walks of life here, and we try to identify their dignity, regardless of where they are. Right. And this is what our Lord calls us to do: is to see people where they are, try to come to them, try to help them, and be a witness in the gospel. Right. I mean, a witness to the gospel of life. And so this is a continued continued conversation for us.
Yeah.
This is not something for HLI that we, I think that what Father Bouquet had said, as the president said that, we don't have control over what governments do. Right? No. And this is not something that this aspect of the law is something that we promote or endorse. Right.
Yeah, and I didn't want this podcast to be about saying, oh, this is good or anything like that. It's just more of giving the broader cultural situation of saying this is what people in Uganda are dealing with. This Western NGOs coming in with tons of money, coming in, putting their ideas in schools, usurping, colonizing, ideological colonization of what African values, and then promoting contraception and abortion and homosexuality within these African countries. That's the broader context of what's going on here. And this law is one country's reaction to that and swinging, like you said, in the opposite direction of going extreme in another way, the pendulum.
Right. And here's the funny thing is that we see here in the United States. I saw, a video, I think it was in 2007, of, at the time, Vice President Joe Biden talking about gay marriage. And he was like, this is not even an issue. Right. It's
Really?
against the law. Senator Obama and I, we respect the law. The law is there. It's not going to change. Right. Right. So now you have fast forward 2023. And if you even question the law, you're a bigot. And
it wasn't even a law. It was a court case.
I mean, saying, today, it's like, but
if you question that.
Yeah. It's like saying, for anybody to question gay marriage or to say that, these things are disordered or contrary to the natural law or whatever, is you're seen as a bigot, you're seen as backward thinking, and that you are a danger, a menace to society. That's kind of where we're headed in the West. They see that in Africa.
Yeah, they're watching America and saying, we don't want that.
We don't want that.
I also think, from my understanding, from what Father Opio said, and I was just looking through the emails that I got from him to find exactly what he said, but my understanding is that basically this bill was also aimed at just stopping these organizations from promoting it. So there's all of the media that's covered this has focused only on the section about aggravated homosexuality and how that can have the death penalty.
Right.
There's a whole chunk of the law that's stopping the promotion of trying to make sure that groups aren't promoting these ideologies in schools and in general. And I think that's something that's not really getting talked about. And I think that's, from my understanding of the bill, that's generally why it was passed in the first place, is because they're trying to put stops on organizations that are trying to promote this in any walk of life.
Right. And it's important for us and for HLI is that this is not one issue, right? It's that whole composite of the culture of death versus the culture of life, right? And this is what the West is doing. This is just one component of it, because once you trivialize human sexuality, right, which is what we see is one of the things that HLI, I think, has been very clear about, is that it all begins with a contraceptive mentality.
Yes.
Right. Once a heterosexual person embraces a contraceptive mentality, they would become hypocrites.
Yeah.
Than to say to somebody who had same-sex attraction and saying, well, what you're doing is immoral.
Because you accept sterile sex.
Exactly. It's just recreative. And, there's the three elements of human sexuality. It's first procreative, unificative, and recreative, right? You take away, the procreative, and it's just these two things, right? In some cases, for a lot of people, it's just recreational.
Yeah.
Right. And
Dr. Jennifer Morse, when she was on the show too, was saying that when we redefined marriage to allow for no-fault divorce, it paved the way for gay marriage as well, because all of a sudden you already redefined marriage back in the 60s when you allowed for no-fault divorce, because all of a sudden marriage isn't between a man and a woman for life, it's between a man and a woman. So you've already taken out the for life, so then you can just change that definition later on.
It's like a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
And then
the ideological dominoes.
Right. And so you see things, and this is one of the things that is what is interesting is like when you take away these kind of the form of things, and you say that the form doesn't really matter, like which is man or woman.
Yeah.
Well, what's next? What about age? Right. Yeah. And you see that happening now too. So I think in a certain sense, if somebody, kind of embraces this kind of worldview, you see that in some circles, and you have, some people talking about that in academia. It's like, why are we discriminating against age if there's consent or the parents' consent? I mean, this is some of Kinsey's work there was based on, a pedophilia that he was in communication with pedophiles that were abusing children, and he used that in his work.
Yeah. And I think like part of the reason I wanted to have a podcast on this topic was because I think it's important for Western audiences to realize that this law didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't like Uganda woke up one day and was like, let's have this really extreme bill.
Right.
They've been undergoing immense pressure from Western groups and trying to push ideologies that they don't agree with on their people. And this bill is a reaction to that. And I think that's what's not being talked about by most people. People are either looking at the bill and saying, that's incredibly extreme. Uganda's terrible, demonize the entire situation. This is terrible.
Right.
Or people just aren't talking about it.
The media is controlling what we see.
Yes.
Right. And they're shutting down. You can get shadow. We were talking about this getting shadow banned on Facebook.
Or self-censorship, where people just say, I don't want to get canceled, so I'm just not going to talk about it in the first place.
Talk about it, yeah, because it's no longer socially appropriate. I mean, there is a great want for fortitude today. Mm-hmm. In Africa, you're seeing that they have no fear about speaking about what they believe, right, and standing fast to it.
I think it's interesting because I have an email here from Father Opio, and he was saying that only one member of parliament did not support the law,
right? And
he was he was apparently funded by these homosexual groups. All the other over 490 members of parliament supported the law.
Right.
I didn't realize that. Even when I've read about this in liberal news sources and all of that. No, I didn't realize it was so widely supported by all the parliamentarians in Uganda.
Right. In my first month or two, I had meetings with the directors in Africa, Emil and George, and both of them made it very clear is the biggest challenge that they see is the West trying to manipulate the African worldview and promoting these things everywhere in Africa. So it's not just Uganda. It's
happening. Our tax dollars are funding it.
And it's our tax dollars that are funding it, right? So
I think that was part of what we were talking about here too, is that like, why should Americans even care about this? There's a connection between the two. Unfortunately, our country is part of what's trying to impose these ideologies on African countries. And one thing I did want to bring up before we, there's a little bit more to talk about, but I wanted to bring up the misinformation that's going on in the media about this. Apparently I specifically asked Father Opio about this, there's this idea going on in American news that there's this witch hunt going on in Africa where people are being evicted from their homes because of this, or needing to flee the country because they're gay or lesbian and they don't feel safe where they are anymore. And I can understand where those stories are coming from. I can understand that mindset. But according to Father Opio, that's not actually happening. That these stories are being dramatized to garner support for pro-LGBTQ groups and to try to shame Uganda. Because you already have World Bank cutting funding. I think Biden suggested possibly imposing sanctions. The UN doesn't agree with the bill from my understanding. But Father Opio was saying that they're not, he said these are all total lies meant to enhance their fundraising. So basically just to our listeners, don't necessarily believe everything you're reading in the media about this law, because according to our affiliate who's actually on the ground in Uganda watching the situation play out, most of those stories are not happening at all. He says all of them. I'm willing to give a little grains of salt in there. You can't know everything going on in your country, but according to him, that's not actually happening.
Well, I think there is. I think that I don't know. I don't know. I'm not questioning father's veracity, but I think that what you have is human nature, right? It's people reacting to things they see as are evil, right?
Mhm.
And they're not acting necessarily in the most Christian way. I mean, when the soldiers came to arrest Christ, Peter took out a sword and cut off the ear of one of the temple, soldiers. Was that
Mhm.
was that an example of following our Lord? No, it wasn't. And I think that you can certainly see people reacting,
Yeah.
in a way that is going to, be unkind or uncharitable towards sinners, right? Because that's what it is. It's not like they're going up saying, "Hey, you've got a lisp," right? And we're
Mhm.
going to, or you have a funny walk. You're a dude that walks like a woman, right? It's not like just because they have an effeminate way. It's people that are caught doing things that are considered immoral.
Mhm.
And I think it's really important for people to talk about that, because I think one of the things sometimes in America what we have is we have this melting pot, and I have had European friends say that Americans don't ever really like to talk about the really important stuff. It's like, talk about religion and politics and polite society, but traditionally that's the way it was. But maybe, if it's just an
You can't even
outworking.
talk about the weather these days because of climate change. Like that used to be the safe subject.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Don't bring up weather at Thanksgiving.
Right. So, this is still a really, important issue, right? And people here don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And,
I don't think no one's known how to talk about this particular law either, from what I can tell.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing is don't demonize people, right? Just
Mhm.
talk about why this behavior is bad,
Mhm.
right? This behavior is contrary to the natural law. It's contrary to what God has deemed to be right. And in
Mhm.
some sense, we're talking about the corruption of children or indoctrinating children. What this young man that is just wicked, right? We see that as wicked. So I'm not trying to whitewash these things, right? But to the point of this. Uh, the spotlight that the West is putting on things. They're putting on a very specific point. They look at this, right? And there's all this other stuff that is going on too
Mhm.
that they never talk about that is equally abhorrent,
Yes.
right? So you know, you know, violence against homosexual people because they're homosexual isn't right, right? It's
No,
not
it's
for a
wrong.
Christian, right? And this is something at HLI we talk about that.
Mhm.
We're teaching people there this, right? So it's very important that, for us and our purposes is that there is a balance that we're striving to hit, but you have human beings.
Well, it's like you were talking before this. You have, what is it, the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, that
Right.
idea of like, the thesis is that you have these groups imposing these ideas on Uganda. And then the antithesis is that then they swing in the opposite direction and have this very extreme anti-homosexuality law, and trying to have that synthesis of, okay, how do you address people in a Christ-like way, but also uphold the dignity of marriage?
Right. Exactly.
And that's what we've been trying to do with our mission.
Right.
I think the other thing for people to realize is that the problem that we've been talking about with these Western groups come in and impose ideologies on sovereign African nations is much bigger than Uganda. Like, we've been talking specifically about Uganda today, but what's going on in Uganda is just a symptom of a much broader problem that's going on. Because I know that last year there was the East African Community Bill, which most people have never heard of. I'd never heard of the EAC until I started here, and people started talking about this great win in the EAC, and I didn't know what that was. But basically, it's seven sovereign nations in Africa that are united, and laws passed. And it's actually Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Uganda, and Tanzania. And that's what the East African community is. And laws that are passed at the EAC automatically go into effect in those countries. So it overrides the sovereign laws. And so last year they had tried to come in and pass a law that was legalizing abortion and promoting comprehensive sex ed in schools, which
Right.
we've talked about the dangers of that on this podcast before. But basically, that's more of another way that they were trying to impose things like the LGBTQ agenda, as well as contraception and abortion getting it into the schools so that kids would accept it. And our missionaries were able to go in and talk to I guess I don't know if it's called parliament for that group, but talk to the representatives there and tell them, like, hey, look, take an actual look at what this sex ed program says. You don't want this in your schools. And they were able to stop the bill.
Right.
But just showing, like, it's so important. We're basically like trying to stop this top down pressure of NGOs trying to put pressure on legislative groups to then legalize things that they can then promote among the people.
Right.
So we're trying to stop that pressure from coming on, but at the same time foster a cultural grassroots community of people that recognize the beauty of marriage and uphold life and really cultivate that so that they can protect marriage and human life and human dignity that way. So you're like stopping top-down pressure, but you're also facilitating this beautiful cultural growth of God's plan for sexuality.
Right. There is, it's in a certain sense, it's like the shepherd, right? The shepherd is with the flock. He's taking care of the flock. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he has to take his staff and he's got to beat the wolf,
Basically, yeah.
And so, you find out these wolves are coming in and they're trying to create a culture that where it's going to jeopardize the entire flock.
Mm-hmm.
We have people there that, are engaged with the parliamentarians and the people in politics, and we try to educate them, right? It's something I've said time and time again. I think it's so important. We're all born in the double darkness of sin and ignorance, right? And educere, the leader, the teacher, leads out of that darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So in this agenda, there's an incredible darkness, right? It is presented as this openness and this lovingness, right, to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we can all agree is a good thing. But it's a distinction of saying that a person who is defined by what they do, right, and that thing that what they do has been always contrary, almost everywhere and all times, to what natural law is or what the cultural folkways and mores are. So that's just not right, right? So as Christians, for me to be true to myself as a Christian, as a Catholic, I have to speak the truth of what this is, right? And it's not, trying to condemn anybody, but it's about saying, let's all strive to be better than what our impulses might be, whether it be to eat too much or drink too much or to, oppress somebody else for my own benefit. This is the thing, is that HLI is, like you said, we're trying to go down to the people that are the moms and the dads and the children and help them, to educate them.
Yeah, because we have the legal activism, which is
Right.
stopping that top-down pressure, but we also have our leadership training where we're training seminarians and people in medical groups and all
Priests,
these leaders of communities.
Bishops, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to help them to understand what it is that is what's happened here.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and then also having the chastity education, making sure that teens and youth understand the beauty of chastity, and then also running pregnancy care centers. And obviously now I'm expanding kind of into a broader topic than specifically what we were talking about today. But I think that like those three really encompass the grassroots of what we try to do. And then you have the legal activism trying to hold off that pressure coming down from like places like America.
right.
And then also I think it's important for our audience to be aware that Malawi also has an upcoming court battle where they're trying to push abortion and homosexuality through the court system. So not necessarily, there's a distinction between decriminalizing homosexuality and legalizing gay quote unquote marriage. And what they're just trying to do here is decriminalize homosexuality, because then that paves the way for allowing for quote unquote gay marriage down the road.
Right.
But
it's the same
really,
playbook that happened here.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what they did here with Roe and Obergefell. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
we'll
I can spell it. But it's exactly, except for they're trying to do 2-in-1.
Right.
So I think it's really important for our audience members to be aware that's going on. And we're running appeals right now trying to alert people in Malawi that they need to talk to their judges and uphold the dignity of marriage. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like on the ground. I know our missionaries there have a plan of how they're planning on trying to keep this from going through the courts, passing through the courts. And then next month, we're going to be having appeals coming up about these. This is like tangentially, it's related to what we're talking about today. And it's basically related to this idea that the way they're promoting homosexuality in these countries is by starting these LGBTQ clubs. And basically the pro-family counterpart to that are these clubs that priests are starting in their parishes, where they basically get teens excited about life and marriage. And they're pro-life groups, but they're really pro-family groups. They also are talking about marriage and trying to make sure that teens know what are going on. They're having fun. They're making friends. They have a good, strong Catholic support network so that they're not lured into these other groups that are trying to promote homosexuality. So it's basically trying to, again, that grassroots, trying to have a pro-family counterpart to these, I'm sure, very appealing LGBTQ clubs that they're starting in schools. So that's also coming up. So those are just two examples of how our missionaries right now in Uganda are trying, and the rest of Africa are trying to fight these situations.
Right. And, like I said before, is that they have way more resources than we do.
Mhm.
It's like the young man in the video had said, you go to these nice swanky places and they've got, auditoriums and they're paying the money and they've got all these great things. And it's like, oh, wow, what's this? This is great. The enthusiasm. And here is the contradictory nature of American ideology, or this gender ideology. Is on one hand, we say, we want to accept and embrace all people and their cultures. But here's a culture that says we don't want that. And you're still trying to impose it upon them. Right.
Yeah.
And so they're pushing back, right? Because it's one of these things where you have, in some very progressive societies, if you say anything contrary to this, you can be put in jail for hate crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is, I express a view, you can't do this, right? Here, it's like, well, if I express my view, you can't do that. So where's, it's one of these things where it's like, this is just the nature, right? Of this is who they are, the logical outworking of their beliefs,
mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's the thing, is this battle, for the hearts and minds of people. It's always been, right? Is that, what is the truth here? And, I think today when we initially talked about this podcast, is we wanted to just kind of get down in the nitty gritty, right? Get right into the, into the dirt here and say, this is the things that.
This is what the law was a reaction against.
Right.
And this is the things that people are actually struggling with there. And we need to make sure that we have a Catholic approach in these countries, because otherwise you're going to be swinging from one extreme to another. And you need organizations like HLI to help people find that balance in the middle where you can approach people like Christ, but not affirm sin.
Right. Well, and that's what, exactly what HLI is doing. Is we're trying to moderate and to temper that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But that's not a reaction that was caused by HLI.
No.
Right. But HLI at the same time is saying, hey, you have to see these things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, the West talks about, having a dialogue and a conversation. We just can't be like that when it's convenient. It has to be about all things that are inconvenient. And I think that, for people that are like-minded that watch this podcast, I would say, we have to be courageous today. Mm-hmm. And that's what we teach people, in Africa, like, this is the courage that you need to stand up to these things, and they're ready for the task.
And you need to be ready to talk about the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And be able to give the broader understanding of the hard stuff, because I think maybe it's just because I was a philosophy major, but I think it's so important to understand the whole context before having a harsh judgment about any kind of particular situation. It's really easy to look at this law on the surface level and just say, wow, that's extreme, and just reject the whole thing, not learn any more about it. And I wanted this podcast to be there so that people could understand, okay, this is why it was extreme. This is what was going on. This is the broader issue that Uganda is dealing with. And the law is one response that's been posed by the government. And then it just challenges our listeners to be like, okay, what is the appropriate response? How do we express to people Christ's love, but also not affirm sin and uphold the dignity of marriage?
Right. And I think the thing is that, in the grand scheme of things, I think we all know you can't necessarily legislate morality, right? Mm-hmm. No matter how many laws we have against murder and rape and theft and whatever, they still happen.
Yeah.
And they happen all the time. But but there is something to be said, though, when your leaders are saying it's okay and it's good. Mm-hmm. And at least having laws saying that's bad.
Do you think that governments have a vested, do you think that it affects a country when you start legalizing things like homosexuality? Do you think that, because a government's role is to basically create a stable social structure for their citizens.
Right. Yeah.
And do you think that is something that rightfully falls within the purview of a government?
Absolutely. I think the mistake that people make today, I make this argument all the time, is that, that's the wall of separation. You can't impose your religious beliefs on me about this particular thing. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm just talking about the natural law. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about things that I can see through reason. I can say these behaviors mm-hmm. lead to these consequences. And the point I referred to before about the 50% of people that are, infected, come in every year, infected by HIV, come from 2% of the population. Mm-hmm. Male homosexuals account for 50% of people that contract AIDS or HIV. Mm-hmm. That's a behavior that's because of this behavior, mm-hmm. right? it's because of the doing, right, which we say is harmful. But even if you look at it from a bigger picture, how when we trivialize, sexuality and remove the procreative, we trivialize our bodies and we unplug ourselves, right, from the natural order, right? And we start playing Dr. Frankenstein.
True, but there's lots of other sins that are going to affect like gluttony or something like that, and it's not necessarily the government's role to come in and say you can't eat this much. So what is it? Do you think
Mayor
specifically?
De Blasio would disagree with you with his law against the big Slurpees, whatever it is, in New York City. Did you hear about that? Like they banned like the big Coke, so you couldn't get a big thing in New York City.
Are they trying to prevent obesity?
Yes. Oh. Well, smoking. I mean, like you can't. It used to be you had cigarettes, on commercials, and now you can't even have it in movies where you show people smoking or on TV at least. I think it's on television.
Interesting. I didn't know that, but I mean, I know you don't see it as much. Like I Love Lucy back in the day, you'd see like the cigarettes. Philip Morris was one of their sponsors. You'd see it, Lucy in every episode.
That's legislating morality, right? You're saying like you can't. You're hurting yourself, and it's true. You are. I mean, cigarette smoking is not healthy.
Is there something in particular about marriage though? Because like at least from my perspective, when you start breaking down marriage, you start breaking down the structure of society, which is going to lead to all sorts of societal effects. So it seems like marriage more than other sins would be one that does fall within the government's purview, because they need to make sure that there's a stable your country is only going to be as stable as your family unit.
Right. You have, look, the whole purpose of this is the thing that I think is just crazy. The whole purpose of legislating marriage, of having a contract, is because when a woman gets pregnant, she becomes vulnerable, and that baby becomes vulnerable, and that baby is a benefit to ideally the husband and the wife, or the mother and the father, and society.
Yeah.
So it is a vested interest that woman and that baby are taken care of, because ideally, I mean, this is traditionally, she was the one who was going to spend the next 15 years, whatever it was, making sure that little child was going to be able to be formed and again be a productive member of society. So the government has a vested interest
in protecting,
only because a woman gets pregnant. Two dudes don't get pregnant. Two women don't get pregnant without a dude, right? That's just the reality of it, right? It's like that's the way. So this idea of marriage, again, is this trivialization of something. Now, I think some people argue like, well, what if, two people that are, of same sex, they want to, one's dying, or they want to pass on property. I understand that from a completely agnostic, secular mentality. Like, I'm not religious. Nope, sorry. I mean, there's something human about saying I'm not, I understand that, but this is what marriage was about. Right. And, but, when you're living in a relativist, world where truth is what you want it to be, you can't have a rational conversation, because what is reason for them? It's whatever I want it to be. I'm Daffy Duck, it's like, or, it's like, you're not talking about reality anymore. And that's law was typically rooted on like medicine. Like when I talk about objective truth, there is objective truth. If there wasn't, anybody could be their own doctor. I could go to you for a prescription for something, right? It's like, I think it's this, because you think it before it is. Well, my kidney stone is not in agreement with you. You know what I mean? Or it's like my tumor that's growing. It's like there are objective truths, that are based on reality. So the government does have to some degree, a vested interest. Like I was saying earlier about Japan, they just passed a law for $3 billion to encourage, Japanese
it's going to affect
couples.
Economy. It's going to affect everything that the government falls in the government's purview.
Right. So, does that answer your question?
I think so. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to be able to wrestle with that a little bit of like, why should the government even have a say in marriage? And I think that we've been talking about that is the government is there to protect the citizens and protect the societal structure, make sure there's a stable structure that people can grow up and become moral, upright, virtuous citizens. And so protecting marriage is a huge part of that.
Right. Some of these things too are very subtle, right? Like we think about like the moral, the outworking of what is the benefit or what is the danger of behavior or an action. Some things are very easy to see. If you stab somebody with a knife, you see the harm that's done, right? It's immediate, right? Like, oh, that's terrible. But if you're Monsanto and you create a weed killer, and you're like, oh yeah, weed killer killing weeds, and it's I'm all my corn now is growing. Everybody's feasting because we have all this stuff now. But in 100 years from now, everybody becomes infertile and sterile. Well, was that a moral thing? But you didn't see it. You didn't foresee what was going to happen. And a lot of times it's only the wise that can penetrate and to see what is the long-term effect of something. And, with behaviors, it's the same type of thing. Some behaviors in the long run can have catastrophic effects on society. And I think that's the part of the conversation that we need to have.
Well, I think this has been a really good conversation today. It was really good to sit down and be able to talk about what's been going on in Uganda and why it's important and why the government should care. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
To all of our listeners, please like, subscribe, leave us a review or a five-star review or a actual comment review on our audio platforms. Check out the new ebooks that I'm about to put on the end screen and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.
Click the like button.
Yes, click the like button. God bless.